Welcome to Podkey Daily News, your fast brief on security, politics, markets, and climate. Today's biggest thread is trust under pressure. Trust in elections, in presidential security decisions, in institutions, and in the systems people depend on when the stakes are high. A White House leak probe is raising legal alarms, a presidential jet swap is undercutting the official story, and election claims are back without new evidence. President Trump used a primetime address to repeat long-debunked claims about 2020 voting machines and non-citizen voting. State election officials and analysts said the material was basically a rehash and did not provide new proof that votes were altered. Why it matters is practical, not evidentiary. The message is aimed at mobilizing his base ahead of the midterms by framing elections as unfair, and it could also discourage some opposition turnout. For now, there's little sign that his preferred federal changes have the votes to move through Congress. Trump also claimed China got roughly 220 million U.S. voter files and described it as the biggest election data compromise in history. Intelligence assessments do say Beijing amassed hundreds of millions of records, but experts draw a hard line here. Voter rolls are informational data, more like a class list, and by themselves, they do not provide a way to change vote counts. No evidence has been presented that the data altered the 2020 outcome. That claim is now being paired with support for the Save America Act, which would tighten mail ballot rules and require proof of citizenship for voter registration. Trump says he wants that bill passed before he signs other legislation, but it appears short of the support needed to get past a Democratic Senate filibuster, and many Republicans would rather stay focused on cost of living issues. Supporters call it election protection. Critics say it risks suppressing turnout. Watch whether the bill becomes a loyalty test inside the GOP, even if it has no clear path into law. Separate from the political claims, election security experts are still warning about real cyber weaknesses in voting infrastructure. The core point is straightforward. Underfunding and documented gaps deserve attention, but repeated post-2020 paper ballot audits still have not found evidence of massive vote-changing fraud. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas was set to brief the public on known vulnerabilities, which matters because reassurance only works if officials are also candid about what still needs fixing. The administration's accepted Qatari luxury jet, retrofitted at a cost of hundreds of millions to serve as a presidential aircraft, is now drawing sharper scrutiny. Photos and expert warnings indicated it lacked visible defensive countermeasure pods that are standard on the older Air Force One, and security officials warned it had not been fully equipped with advanced anti-missile and related defenses. That concern moved from theory to action on a trip from Turkey to England, when the Secret Service reportedly urged President Trump to switch back to the older Air Force One. That directly undercuts the public explanation that the older plane was used simply for old time's sake. The practical takeaway is that the swap looks precautionary, not ceremonial, especially given travel near volatile regions close to Iran. What to watch next is whether the administration explains exactly what systems are still missing and whether the aircraft will keep being used for sensitive foreign travel before those upgrades are complete. The fallout did not stop with the plane itself. FBI Director Kash Patel reportedly spent about 8 hours inside the White House overseeing the Air Force One leak investigation, which is unusual enough to trigger immediate concern about blurred lines between the Bureau and the presidency. At the same time, U.S. Attorney Jay Clayton and Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche issued grand jury subpoenas to New York Times reporters seeking testimony about sources, and FBI agents reportedly hand-delivered photocopies of those subpoenas. The Times called it a brazen act meant to intimidate journalists, and legal experts pointed to Justice Department policy saying reporter subpoenas should be a last resort. That policy question is now becoming a broader norms question. Senate Democrats, including Kirsten Gillibrand and Ron Wyden, used confirmation hearings to argue that the visible White House FBI coordination and the speed of the subpoena push look politicized. This matters well beyond one leak case because precedent is the point. If aggressive source hunting becomes normalized, the chill on national security reporting could outlast the current administration. In Texas, officials say the response to the 2024 Hill Country floods was stronger than in the deadly 2023 disaster because warning systems and emergency plans were upgraded, including camp-specific planning and new sirens. They also say better alerts and greater public responsiveness helped reduce fatalities. That is the encouraging part. The harder part is the trend line. Scientists continue linking the growing frequency of record-breaking rainfall to climate change, and this year's storms dumped as much as about 20 inches of rain in some places. So the short version is that adaptation helped, but the hazard itself is getting tougher to predict and manage. The relevant question now is whether other flood-prone regions are updating warning systems quickly enough before the next extreme event arrives. On Wall Street, AI enthusiasm took another hit as U.S. tech stocks dropped sharply and the selling spread into European semiconductor names. Investors are increasingly worried that AI-linked valuations are stretched and that concern is being amplified by rising oil prices and U.S.-Iran tensions, which add broader risk to already expensive growth trades. There's a separate AI competition story overseas. Xi Jinping launched a Shanghai-based AI cooperation organization built around open weight and open source models, aimed largely at the global south and positioned as an alternative to the US-led AI order. China is promising training and support for developing countries while its startups use these models to close the gap with firms like OpenAI and Anthropic. For companies and policymakers, watch two things: whether this creates a real parallel AI governance block, and whether market pressure forces a tougher reassessment of what current AI leaders are actually worth. Back in Washington, the SEC is also facing a backlash after proposing to make quarterly earnings reports optional. Roughly 200,000 public comments came in, with many arguing that less frequent reporting would reduce transparency and give fraud more room to grow. Two quick items with immediate public impact. The FDA traced a cyclosporiasis outbreak that sickened thousands across 5 states to a single Mexican lettuce supplier connected to Taco Bell locations. Taco Bell has stopped using the implicated lettuce and is working with authorities to remove remaining product. And wildfire smoke from northern Minnesota and Ontario pushed air quality to unhealthy and in some areas hazardous levels across parts of the Midwest and Northeast. Health officials say even people without existing respiratory conditions may feel the effects, so the practical advice is simple: limit outdoor exposure and use a mask if you need to be outside. On the science front, astronomers detected an atmosphere on LHS 1140b, a rocky planet about 49 light-years away in its star's habitable zone. It now stands out as one of the most promising nearby targets for future searches for biosignatures. That's the brief for today. You're listening to Podkey Daily News, and we'll be back with the next high signal update. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.